So as I always do at the end of the year, I am panic reading all the new releases in preparation for my end of the year content. Today I'm going to be talking about 2024 books for horror and thrillers that I have been reading. I have some hits, some misses, some great wins, and some disappointments here, all in preparation to wrap up the year. So a few things in this video include one of the darkest horror books I've read all year. I've had complaints or comments on my channel saying that all the new releases when it comes to horror are pretty soft and sweet and safe, and they're looking for something really dark and gruesome. I got you covered here. This was a wonderful surprise. And on top of that, I am finding myself falling in love with thrillers all over again. I have several in this video that I absolutely adore. Not only going to be favorites of this year, but probably all-time favorites. So if any of that sounds good, hope you stick around. Let's get started. So first, let's give away the goods up front. The most disturbing dark horror book that I read this year is Compound Fracture by Andrew Joseph White. And what is going to be a surprise to a lot of you, and in fact was a bit of a surprise to me, is that this book is not even labeled as adult fiction. It's actually young adult, and I often say that I tend to read adult. I am someone in my 30s. I'm not someone who really always relates to young characters the same way. And again, as someone who has a preference for the dark and disturbing, I tend to find that in the adult section where it is supposed to be more mature, more adult, and have all of the subject matter that is not suitable for young adults. And instead, this book kind of breaks all of the stereotypes. In fact, I would be really hesitant to recommend this to anyone with a young teenager, perhaps if they're 16 or 18, but this book pulls no punches. It's dark and messed up, and compared to a lot of the adult books I'm reading this year, and I'll admit I have the same problem a lot of you do, a lot of them are playing it really safe. They're going through the tropes of horror, but they're afraid to really go there and be really punchy and gruesome and dark, and instead probably are trying to appeal to a wider audience, more of a thriller audience, and get them into some soft, light horror. Instead, this one does not worry about who it's marketed to. It does not seem to care that it's supposed to be a young adult novel, and instead goes to dark places. So I should probably back it up, give you a really brief synopsis. This is a story that is set in a small town where there are years of generational family trauma and violence. So you have these feuding families within this town, and that generational violence and trauma is continuing to the present day. We follow a young person at the beginning of the story who is experiencing violence themselves, and you find out there is, again, more to the history of this town that is all explored. It's one that I purposely want to give away as little as possible because first, the book is really short, so I think you want to experience it yourself. And again, I always say that it's more about the experience rather than just telling you a particular plot point, because in the hands of another writer, this book could have been something quite safe, and instead it was something quite scary. So what I loved about this one is that, again, it's very tightly written. I'm someone who's become kind of particular about narrative focus and prose and writing, and this one just has a brutality to it. So I encourage you, if you haven't checked it out, at least try the first chapter, which you should be able to sample as an ebook. And if that first chapter, which is only one page, does not hook you in, this book is probably not for you. For me, I read the first page and pretty much knew this book was going to become a favorite. I was so ready for it. I basically strapped in and read the rest of it. I ripped through it because it was so good. And from start to finish, this book is tightly written. You have some interesting imagery playing all throughout. And again, it's dark and brutal. There is harm to animals, so I recognize that is going to be a skip for some of you. But again, if you want a book that is going to go there, that is going to be dark, that is going to be serious, sometimes those elements come along with the ride. And so I hate to oversell this book, but I also insanely love it. And I do think that if you're looking for a story that at the center is really about a young person dealing with coming out, coming to find themselves, and dealing with that within the ugliness of a small town, and all of the, again, the trauma, the violence, the history, the ugliness that comes with people, humans who are terrible to each other. This is a book that highlights that in the best possible way. This author has definitely become a potential favorite of mine. Highly recommend him. I've only read one of his backlist books, but I'm definitely going to change that because I want to read everything he's written at this point and read everything he comes out with next. Next, we have Memorials by Richard Chizmar, and this is a story that follows a group of teenagers who are going along the Appalachian Road, and they are going there to film this documentary all about the memorials along the way. This is very much much a story about young people, is kind of that story that blends together a potential supernatural thriller with potentially some horror elements, and I'll leave it to you to find out where that all falls into place. This is one that I was really anticipating it coming out and was really holding off finalizing my end of the year content until I could read this book, and that's because I loved the author's previous book so much, particularly Chasing the Boogeyman and its sequel, Becoming the Boogeyman, both favorites for the years that they came out. And so based off the premise, the fact that I've loved this author before, I had high hopes for this one. I should preface this by saying that I think my expectations were too high. I found the other series to be incredibly engrossing, addicting, the kind of book that you cannot put down, that you will stop everything else, you will ignore your family, your household chores, everything in your life until you finish that kind of book. That's what I was hoping for here, and instead I found a very familiar, predictable, somewhat tropey, or actually rather tropey, horror slash supernatural thriller story along the way, and for me it just was not the special read I wanted it to be. I don't think the book is actually doing anything wrong, I just think that it's playing it very safe and providing a narrative that I've read so many times before. You've heard me say before that it's hard for me not to be critical of books that are repetitive of things I've read over and over again, and that's very much the case here. I did have another friend who also read it right on new release, and he loved it far more than me, so again, always take my opinions with a grain of salt. But for me, again, if you just love the tropes that the author's playing with, I think that your mileage may vary depending on that. But if you're expecting that engrossing, addictive experience that I got from his previous work, I didn't find it here. I found the characters to be fine, but pretty simplistic, a bit more like stereotypes. The narrative again followed particular twists and turns, which you could generally see coming, and it's more about just kind of following the events as they play out in a way that you would expect them to. So needless to say, I was really disappointed. Not a bad book. I think I still gave it 3.5 stars, but did I expect it to be a favorite of the year? Absolutely. And is it gonna be? Definitely not. Now let's switch over and talk about some fantastic thrillers, starting with What Have You Done by Shari Lapena. And this is one that is an author who I've read and loved before. I think she's just a really talented storyteller, writing really engrossing books. And once again, I found this one to be just as addictive as the other books I've read before by her. This one's told from multiple points of view. So the basic premise is that there is this girl or young woman who is found dead. And so we follow the story from the perspective of her then boyfriend, and then we also have the different parent perspectives that are tied in. And what I love so much, what takes this from being just a regular average dead girl mystery thriller book, is the fact that because of the perspectives we get, we know as the reader, this is right from the beginning, that the characters know more than they are telling, that they are lying to the police. And so we are trying to figure out why those lies are happening, what is the meaning behind them. Certainly there's some obvious reasons you would be lying to the police, and so we're trying to parse that out. I did not know who to believe, who to trust. My suspicions moved around throughout the story, and I don't want to oversell or preface too much about the ending, but I think the author did a great job of keeping that momentum going and not making the story overly simplistic. But I very much love it because not only do you get the son's perspective, but you also get the perspective of his mother. And questioning again with the title of the book is, how do you deal with the fact that your son looks terribly, terribly guilty? How do you deal with that when your job as a mother is to protect your son, but maybe he's the problem here? And so I love the nuance of it. You don't trust anyone. The author is great for not making anyone look black or white. And again, moving things around. So just when you think you have it all figured out, the author will switch things and switch them back. And I just had so much fun reading this one. Highly recommend. Again, this is the book that got me hooked on thrillers again this year. Then I went on to read Snake Oil by Kelsey Dimberg. And this is a story that follows a woman who is involved in the wellness industry. So she is someone who sells these products that are supposed to make someone healthy. And so really she's selling the concept of health. How do you turn health and wellness into a commodity? So it's very much this topical thriller story that is also a bit of a social commentary on how we have turned our idea of self-care and health into something that is bought and sold, and really breaking that down, deconstructing it. And I thought the book was really smart in what it was doing. For me, the book wasn't quite as sharp as I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be a little bit more cutting and really go there. I couldn't help but compare this book to Youth Juice, which is another book that deals with the wellness industry mystery, but that one is specifically marketed as a horror, and so in comparison, that one is a lot more punchy, while this one is a lot more safe, and it's much more about these catty women and positioning and kind of backstabbing, but it's done in a much lighter manner in comparison. So I like this one. I would recommend it if you're someone who kind of likes to poke fun at wellness culture. You don't fully invest in it. I think you could have some fun with this one. Certainly if you are really deep into that culture, you might find this book perhaps a little bit offensive because it is meant to poke fun at it. Know yourself, know if this is the kind of book for you. I enjoyed it. Wasn't a favorite of the year, but definitely one worth still checking out. Next, I'm so excited to talk about The Boyfriend by Freida McFadden, another author who I find to write really addictive stories, one that I've loved before, and once again, she definitely delivered. This is one that I picked up on a lark. I found it on the Hoopla app if you have that available through your library. And this is one where it is about a woman who is single, dating in New York City in, I believe, her 30s, and so she's kind of struggling with the dating scene. However, finally her luck changes when she comes across and meets a man who becomes the perfect boyfriend. However, this is a thriller, so naturally there's more going on. While she finds him to be the perfect gentleman, it seems like he is hiding something. And then the story is also interspliced with these other flashbacks to a past time where we follow an individual and there is a young woman who has been murdered, and we're piecing together what happened. You eventually figure out how the two perspectives come together. And I would argue that, again, if you're someone who reads a lot of thrillers like myself, you'll kind of figure out how it pieces together. And that's not really a spoiler. It doesn't ruin the book. In fact, I think the author kind of expects you to figure it out before it's officially revealed. Instead, this one is so much more about coming along for the ride, which for me is so much more fun. I love thrillers where the author doesn't try to make the entire point of the book surprising the reader with some outlandish twist or turn, and instead letting us as the reader enjoy a train wreck and watching it go down the track. And that's exactly what you have here, because you know there's something wrong. You see all of the writing on the wall, all the red flags, and it's just a matter of figuring out what's going on and how bad is it going to be. And when it all comes together, it's fantastic. I love the ending. I just finished it as of recording this video. Highly recommend it. I am just giddy with how good the ending was. This might be my new Freida McFadden book, and I've loved several of her books before. So if you're a fan and have not checked out this one yet, don't sleep on it. So much fun, so addicting. I just love this one. And if you are single, dating is kind of a nightmare, at least according to this book. Next, we have The Grey Wolf by Louise, which is a mystery book in an ongoing series that is all about Garmesh, who is this Quebecois French detective. I've been reading this series for years now, and the later books in my mind just get better and better. You do ideally want to read some of the earlier books first. I don't think you have to read all the books in order to appreciate the newer ones, but it does help to kind of see some of the character development because so much has changed and developed and grown since the earlier books. I've talked about the series before, but for me, it's a few things that I love about it. First, again, the characters. You have these really complex characters within the narrative where they are fully fleshed out, they're nuanced. This book is not technically cozy. It does have a darkness to it, but also a quaintness, especially because it has that small Quebecois, small town feel to it that I think really adds a sense of atmosphere. This particular book, without getting too much into spoilers, each one is technically a self-contained mystery, so you could technically start here, but again, I think you'll get a lot more out with some character perspective. But in this one, we follow the main detective, this officer who is being contacted by this individual, and basically there's someone who is way too personal. They have potentially broken into the home, they have taken things, they were sending personal messages to this man. And so it's a story that I love, the kind of the general premise where you have someone who is getting way too intimate with this police investigator, and so he's really not having the personal space or privacy to his own personal life as he is trying to work within the confines of his job. So love this one. It was suspenseful from the start. It was gripping. It was well done. It had some good character development along the way as the story continues to progress. I loved it. I got the chance to do the audio, which now has a new Quebecois narrator. I love the old one, but honestly the new one is great too. Highly recommend this one. If you're a fan of the series, you definitely want to check it out. In my mind, this is one of the best entries I've personally read. And finally, we have The Folly by Gemma Amor. This is a story that follows a woman who, as a child, her father was accused and then convicted of murdering this girl's mother. However, she actually does not believe this conviction to be true. She believes he's being falsely put in jail, and so she stays close to her father. And then the story begins as he's actually getting out of jail for early release, and so she's taking him in, taking care of him, because naturally it's hard to get a job after being in prison. And so we follow them as they're trying to reconnect and dealing with all the emotional heaviness. The book started with a lot of promise. I really found it to be very emotional from the start. You have this father and daughter, but but quickly the book narrative gets messy. I can see the author was trying to do a lot within a short number of pages, and while I have enjoyed this author's work before, in this case it just didn't work for me. I felt like it was too ambitious, trying to do too much in an overly simplified way. This book does have poor reviews, and unfortunately I hate to add more to the pile, but I really do think that this book is a miss. If you want to enjoy this author's work, I encourage you to check out something else. They have several popular books like novellas that I think better represent what this author can do. This one was a letdown and not very representative of their potential. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And for me, I gotta say, this has been one of the best end of the years for new releases I've had in quite a while. And so I'm gonna do something I haven't done in several years now, and I'm not even sure if I've ever done this, but I'm gonna do a separate top 10 for horror books published in 2024 and a top 10 thriller list for 2024. So definitely stick around, subscribe if you haven't, because I have a lot of books to round up in the end of the year. There's so many good ones that came out. This has just been a great year to be a reader, especially if you love the dark and disturbing like I do. So if you enjoyed this video, hope you stick around. You can drop a comment, even just an emoji, like something creepy to represent what we talked about here. Give me a thumbs up, hit that little notification bell, and I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.